So with the hexagonal vents all done and dusted, you can go ahead and change the scale, change the position of the curve as you see fit, such as I'm doing on screen right now, as it's still all going to work. It's probably going to be a little bit laggy as you're trying to move around all these various vertices, especially if, much like myself, you've actually gone ahead and put a subdivision surface modifier on those hexagons. It's probably really going to make Blender lag out, but it's a really good system because even though we've got all this set up, we still can make adjustments to it, much as I've done since the last episode. I've actually gone and changed the scale of my hexagons because I didn't quite like that they were so small. So it's really procedural and you can modify things on the fly as you go, as you see fit. In this tutorial, we're going to model in some details so that the tubing here actually connects to the helmet in a way that makes sense, and we are also going to model in the lights on the side of the helmet. I've opted to speed up the process of myself modelling in these circular details at the front and back of the tubing, as I just don't think you guys need to see me meticulously muck around with two circular objects for about 10 minutes, so I'm going to speed it up. It's really not that hard. I will show you the start of it, how we actually extract the circles that we want from this Bezier curve by converting it to a mesh. I'll speed up the process of myself just mucking around with it all and getting the positioning. I'm sure you guys can figure that out without watching 10 minutes of me doing it. And then I'll show you the very end of what we do with the details in actually lowering the poly count of them using some keyboard shortcuts and then finalizing the detailing. I've created a custom shortcut here in using Alt-C. I believe it got changed in Blender 2.8 onwards. I just created this shortcut as that's how it used to function back in the old 2.7 versions of Blender. I don't know what the shortcut is for converting curves to mesh anymore. So you'll just need to find that one out, as I did make a custom shortcut to do that. Once we have these converted to meshes, we're just going to want to select, I think we do the first 1 to 3 rows of faces, or it might just be 1 or 2, at the front and back ends of this converted mesh here, and we're just going to extract those from everything else, as we only need the front and back to model in these little tube parts that we're doing. You'll notice that I scale them just here. I'm only doing that because I can't quite figure out where the roll faces are at the very end of the ventilation tube here. So I'm just scaling them out so I can get a rough idea. I think around there is okay, and what I've done there is I've just inverted the selection and then deleted all the other faces that we didn't need, just so we can keep those 2 loops right there. Once these are extracted, we just want to go ahead and scale them, and then we can begin doing some extruding, just so that it covers up the connection point of the tube at the start and end of the helmet, because as I said earlier, at the moment it just doesn't look right. It just sort of phases into the helmet for no good reason. There's no detail around there that indicates that these tubes are connected to the helmet in any way, so that's why we're placing these in. From here, I am just going to speed up my process of it, as for the most part, it's just a lot of pushing and pulling of these faces once I fill them in, and using some edge slides. It just takes me a while to get to a stage where I think the depth of them looks nice and it sort of flows in correctly with the rest of the helmet. So I'm just going to speed it up. It's going to be much similar for you guys on your end of just pushing and pulling these around until you get to a space where you're comfortable with them. I will show you the end result I get so you can try and replicate that. My biggest piece of advice for doing this is you just want a nice bit of an offset between the outside edge of the circles that we're modeling at the moment and where the tube actually intersects with them. Just going to slow things down here because this is rather important. I just go ahead and I modify the curvature of this part that we extruded a little bit earlier. As you see, I just don't have quite enough space to fit this circular detail in with the rest of the tubing. And even looking at this here, I can see that this extrusion piece isn't actually in line with the curve on the outside edge of this. So we can go ahead and we can just drag this down just so that it sort of better fits the shape and keeps those edges on the outside nice and even with one another. Just wanted to make note of the fact that these tubes that we're modeling in right now, they have a bevel on the currently selected edge. You may have missed it on the previous one just since I did speed it up. I just wanted to let you guys know so that you don't miss that little detail. And that concludes what took me about 10 to 15 minutes and a few seconds for you guys. So I hope it was of no inconvenience to speed that up. I'm sure you guys, especially by this stage in the tutorial series, will have enough of a competent set of skills to be able to position those in a way that looks nice on your model. And you can see for reference the way that mine have ended up in the end. I got a little bit sidetracked here. I'm really good at doing this in my modeling. And I noticed the fact that we never went ahead and connected the mouthpiece to the rest of the helmet. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. We just want to remove the mirror modifier and the subdivision surface modifier, select the mouthpiece, and then select the helmet and Control J to connect them. And from there, we can go ahead and we can merge all the doubles that exist between the two pieces of the helmet. Once we do that, we just want to go ahead and mark this newly created edge with a crease, and everything will be looking nice and crisp. Just a note here, we have a pole sitting at the bottom of that sharply marked edge at the moment. Now that is less than ideal as it's going to be creating shading errors for us later on, especially once we apply the subdivision surface modifier to it. Don't worry, we do go ahead in one of the later tutorials and we go and add a support loop around that area and change up the topology. So we don't need to worry about that too much for the time being. I just wanted to point out to the fact that we are going to fix that up later on. In adding that mouthpiece mesh to our helmet, it's actually messed up some of our mirroring on the tubes there. So we just need to go ahead with our mirror modifier and activate the helmet as being our target origin for the mirror to take place on. This is yet another instance of me getting completely sidetracked off of what we're supposed to be doing, and I decided to go and touch up some works from some of the previous tutorials. So I eventually go ahead and join these three separate visor brim details all together, keep the mirror modifier on them, have a subdivision surface modifier on them, and go ahead and clean up some of the interior faces that are rather unnecessary, and then mark all of the edges with creasings where it is necessary. So now that I'm back on track with what we should actually be doing for this tutorial, we want to go ahead and just pull back the edges on this part of the helmet here. I don't really know what to call this, but we know that this is where the lights are contained. So we just want to pull these sort of edges back, and that just gives us a nice little beveled profile just on the edges there. Once we have that done, we are going to go and fill in a nice big old nasty end-on right where that gap is at the moment. We're going to do something that's probably not encourageable, especially if you are a beginner to modeling, but we're going to fill this end-on in and for the most part keep it as an end-on and actually keep it as a separate part of the mesh compared to the rest of the helmet. The reason we're doing this is because we can actually hide a lot of the edges that we're going to mark with creases, so you're not going to see the fact that it's a really sharp edge and that it's actually separate from the rest of the geometry. It's a little bit of a hacky method of doing things, although in the end result, and especially given where this is located, I don't deem it to be that big of a deal, and it's more so about the end result that we get and it looking good, as opposed to everything on the model being 100% perfect and everything being connected and having nice creased edges. So from here on in, it's just a lot more basic modeling, so I'll leave you guys to it up until we get to the final stages of modeling the light detailings, as I just want to make note about some of the things I do with the topology and the future implications that they hold. So this extra loop that I'm adding in here, I'm going to bevel it and then do an indent on the model here. This is a really unnecessary detail. You don't have to put it in if you don't want, though I do rather model more details than are actually needed, because if you do want to then eventually simplify this mesh later on, you can go through, decimate the mesh, take out these details, and then always bake it back down into a normal map. There are two reasons why we're modeling this. One, it looks nice, there's more detail. And two, it's going to help us separate out the area for where we want just a black metal material or a dielectric material on the actual lights itself, and then where the glass material would be located later on. As we won't do it in this course, but when we get into the texturing and shading parts of the helmet tutorial, we will be separating this so that the front part will have a glass shader on it, and behind it we will actually put a proper light source, just so that you get more realistic looking lights emitting from the helmet. So we've done rather well this tutorial. We got a little bit more done than I was actually anticipating because I got sidetracked and I decided to show you guys to join the mouthpiece to the rest of the mesh, and we also went through and fixed up some of the visor brim detailing. Not what I was expecting to be doing in this tutorial, but I get sidetracked more often than not when I model, and that's probably why everything takes me so long. But we have done well. We went ahead and made those little details to connect the ventilation tubes to the helmet in a more appropriate fashion, and right now we're just finishing off the light sources. So we've done well, and we are finally starting to add in some of the more major details to the helmet, so it should start to be looking more complete on your end. The next tutorial will be marking the halfway point for this tutorial series. So you guys have done a superb job to make it this far. You should be very proud of the model that you've managed to produce so far. And believe me, it's just going to keep getting better as we progressively add more and more detail to it. So with that said and done, I will see you guys in the next tutorial.